that was a major moment in my life where the Lord began to really work in me going, hey, are you ashamed of the gospel?
Oh, wow.
Are you ashamed of me? Are you ashamed of being a pastor? Why are you not willing to just tell people, who you are and what you're for, and do so, passionately?
Hey everyone, it's Abdu Murray, and I'm here with another installment of Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda. It's an installment of short videos where I bring a friend who does evangelism and apologetics for a living to actually encourage you all who might not do it for a living to be able to get into the game and not worry about getting it right all the time and making sure that every single time you encounter someone that you're on point or perfect, because none of us are. I'm not, and my guests aren't either, and we're here to share with you some of the times when we coulda, shoulda, or woulda done something differently. So, who I have with me today is my good friend Andy Steiger. Thanks for being on Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda, Andy.
Yeah, it's great being with you.
Well, Andy is the director, or the founder actually, of Apologetics Canada, which is an apologetics ministry in Canada, hence the name. It's very cleverly titled, by the way, your ministry. And we're here in actually beautiful Vancouver, well, Vancouver-ish, BC, surrounded by mountains, and probably the coolest backdrop I've had doing one of these videos so far. Almost died a couple of times trying to get up here with the windy roads and the lack of guardrails, but it was a lot of fun. So I'm here at a leadership conference with you. Thanks for having me at the conference, and thanks for being my guest while you're being my... See, this is a nested guesting going on right now, so I really appreciate it. Well, Andy, let's talk about a time. I'm going to give a story about a time when I coulda, shoulda, or woulda done something differently. And it was actually something I not coulda, shoulda, or woulda done. It's something I wish I wouldn't have done. And so a friend of mine and I were having an encounter with someone. I was asked to be sort of like the main person who would talk to this person who was not a Christian, who was a skeptic. And I had a friend with me who was part of the team, essentially, who was trying to reach this person. We were ganging up on them. They knew that we were going to be there, but they had asked me to be the one to address some of their skeptical questions. But what had become apparent to me during the course of this conversation was that my friend was way more connective with this particular person because of their background, because of the questions they were asking. They were doing a way better job. But I felt the need to sort of justify why I do what I do and why I got asked to be a part of this, to keep interjecting. And so I made what could have probably been a half an hour conversation, a good 90 minutes, when I should have just shut up. I contributed almost nothing to that conversation. At least that's my assessment. So what I could have, should have, or would have done was just be quiet and let God use the person who was actually not even intended to be the person being used, but that other person to be able to be used by God to reach that person more effectively than I did. So friends, there are times when you ought to just be quiet and just let God do his thing. And if he does his thing through somebody else, all the better. So anyway, I've learned the lesson is that there's going to be times when I just need to be quiet. I get paid to talk for a living, but sometimes the best thing I can do is not do what is my natural inclination, which is to talk. So that's what I could have, should have, or would have done differently. And the good news is I have done it differently other times as well. Not perfectly, but I have done that. So how about you?
Yeah, I guess mine is I shoulda. So mine happened early in my ministry. So I pastored and I've done apologetics ministry. So I've pastored for 20 years. And early in my pastoral ministry, when my wife and I were first married, I was doing a wedding. So I had officiated this wedding, and it was for this doctor and his wife. And she was a nurse. So as you can imagine, they were heavily connected in the medical community. And they had this very extravagant, beautiful wedding. And the reception was out on this boat, out on the harbor. And and I'll never forget this. Excuse me. I'll never forget this because I'm sitting at this table with all of these surgeons and, heads of department and everything. And it just so happened I find myself at this table and everybody goes around and you've been there before, right? It's like, so what do you do? Yeah. Right. And so everybody's saying, oh, I'm this surgeon, or I'm this just anesthesiologist or whatever. And they're going around and it's coming closer and closer to me. And I'm like, what should I say? Yeah. And to be honest, this is something I've had to work through. And by the way, my wife is right with me when this is happening. Of course, she's going to see one of my worst moments ever because I was really struggling with my identity as a pastor, especially amongst these these professionals, and I felt very insecure.
Yeah.
And it came my turn, and I said very sheepishly that I'm a pastor, but I said, I'm actually thinking I'm going to study to become a lawyer. And I'll never forget the look that my wife had when she made eye contact with me, And I don't know if you've had those moments where your wife kind of looks at you like, you're an idiot. Like, why did you say that?
Well, where did that come from?
Yeah. Not like a bad, you're an idiot, but like, what on earth?
Yeah.
And I was thinking the same thing. And I'm like, man, I really wish you weren't here to see that. But I also was just thinking in my mind, like, why am I ashamed to actually say, hey, I'm a pastor and I'm excited to be a pastor?
Yeah.
And God had, that was a major moment in my life where the Lord began to really work in me going, hey, are you ashamed of the gospel?
Oh, wow.
Are you ashamed of me? Are you ashamed of being a pastor? Why are you not willing to just tell people, who you are and what you're for, and do so, passionately?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, this kind of story came full circle because just this summer I was in Romania and I was preaching at various venues.
Yeah.
And I was at this church, and and I gave this talk and everything, and the next day I was meeting with this professor and his son. We're having lunch together, and at this lunch, the son says to me, hey, I really liked what you had to say, at your talk and everything. And I was like, oh, really? I go, what did you like? And I'm expecting, I made some profound point or whatever, of course. Yeah. And he's like, well, you told this story about when you're at a table with these doctors, and, and I shared this humiliating moment, that God really had to teach me from. And he said something very interesting. This young kid said, that's the first time I've ever heard a pastor admit a mistake from the pulpit.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that hit me in a number of ways. One is like, hey, we actually need to be willing to share our mistakes. We don't always get it perfect.
Right.
But also, are we willing to learn from those mistakes? And are we willing to allow other people to learn from our mistakes?
Yeah. As I hear your story and the vulnerability with which you share that story, and then shared it quite recently as well, I think we have, maybe even especially in American or North American evangelicalism, where we have this sort of picture of the pastor as this paragon of confidence, and
never gets it wrong.
Never gets it wrong.
Yeah.
Always gets it right. Of course, we know that isn't the case, but we often feel this need to that person who never gets it wrong, always gets it right, is super confident in their faith, can stand in front of anybody and say, I'm a pastor, I'm proud of the gospel, here's why you should believe it. And therefore we leave it to them to do it. But you've shared a number of things. One is, if someone who's got something to lose by being vulnerable can be vulnerable, then all of us should be. And number two is, among many different things, I'm sure the list is not exhaustive, is pray for your pastors so that humility and growth through vulnerability and communication of through vulnerability will be the kind of thing that becomes the norm rather than the exception. So thanks for sharing that, man. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's
one of those things where I pray, God, give me courage, but also just give me a love for you, and a willingness and a boldness to just be confident that I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, I'm an apologist, and I'm happy to be that.
Amen. Well, the Bible tells us not to be ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of salvation to all who believe, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. And we see this in Romans 1:16 specifically. So that is, I would even say, especially vulnerable, because that isn't just, I flubbed a argument, or I didn't make that one right, or I wish I would have thought of this thing to say, as opposed to saying, at that moment, I actually didn't represent Christ well, because that other person might be thinking, well, wait a minute, if this message is supposed to be believed, embraced, and change your life, why are you willing to change your life away from it? And man, thanks for sharing that story. That's a powerful story, man. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
Well, friends, this has been Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda, and my good friend Andy Steiger here with Apologetics Canada. Check out what Apologetics Canada is doing. It's apologeticscanada.ca, right? In Canada. And if you're not in Canada, it's still apologeticscanada.ca. And they have a podcast and all kind of great stuff on social media as well. So check them out. Check out Andy and his team are doing. And he's got a team of people who are doing great work. So you'll find out from them how you, if you could have, should have, or would have done something different, Apologetics Canada can help you with that, as well as other great ministries as well. So thanks again.